Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Morning Shot.
Welcome to Morning Shot with me, Ahmad Akhtar. Singapore's unemployment rate may be low, but for those who've been retrenched, the job search today can feel like a long, lonely grind. From AI-filtered resumes and hundreds of unanswered applications to the emotional toll of repeated rejection, finding work isn't just about skills, it's about stamina. A recent article in the Straits Times titled "What People Wish They Knew Before They Got Laid Off" captures this reality through the voices of 11 Singaporeans who have experienced long-term unemployment, along with insights from experts. The piece lays out 5 key lessons to weather this difficult period, from using your network in unconventional ways to rethinking what success looks like. And joining us today is the journalist behind the story. His name is Teo Kai Xiang, and he's from the Straits Times Life Desk. Kai, good morning. Thanks for joining us so early. Is this past your wake-up time?
Yes, earlier than usual, but glad to be here.
All right, thanks for joining us. What made you want to tell this story now? You know, unemployment has been a trend that we've covered for a long, long time. Was there a particular moment that made you feel it was the right time to explore this topic?
Yeah, I think NTUC does an annual survey every year, and the most recent one had 34% of the people they surveyed expressing concern that they would lose their jobs in the next 3 months. And it kind of captures this mood of economic anxiety that's around right now. A lot of layoff posts, particularly within the tech sector that you see on LinkedIn these days. So yeah, this is mostly an article to help people kind of get through this time.
Were there common threads across the stories? You interviewed 11 Singaporeans, or did the experiences vary quite widely? And how did you end up choosing these 11?
I usually found them via LinkedIn, usually people who were pretty open about their own unemployment journeys. I think the common thread that was throughout all of their stories was the fact that it was a real low point. Like, people really felt they reached this rock bottom moment when savings were running low. They weren't sure if like the 300 over jobs that they applied to was going to go anywhere.
Yeah, okay, let's dive into some of those individuals that you talked to. We have Kai Su, who described his experience of applying to hundreds of jobs, to your point just now, with very little response. What did you take away from that conversation about how rejection or silence even affects job seekers over time?
Yeah, so from him and a lot of others, I think like 300 felt like this magic number, like when they were counting all the applications that they were applying to. And I don't think it's necessarily this magic number as much as this point where you kind of reach this stage where you feel like you really need to reassess everything, reconsider your approach, really sharpen down like what you're sending out and what you're sending out to. That was kind of my takeaway from him, where it's important to kind of learn from what you're applying.
In Kaisen's case, you know, I want to dive into his emotional well-being. You know, jobs can be a significant source of emotions, both positive and negative. And when you're searching for a job or when you're retrenched, that can manifest as stress, anxiety, sadness, anger. So what was his approach to dealing with this situation?
His approach was pretty interesting because he was telling me that he was spending a lot less time on LinkedIn, which sounds a bit counterintuitive because LinkedIn is the networking platform. But to him, it was actually kind of pretty rough. Constantly be seeing all these life updates, constantly be seeing a lot of posts from wannabe influencers who are telling their grift and their own life stories. And in the end, he really tried to trim out all of the noise and focus on the signal, which is to reach out to the people that he knew, went to events that he knew mattered more than just spending time on LinkedIn.
Yeah, so taking matters into his own hands. Speaking of signal, you also featured someone known as Uzan, a retrenched tech worker who now drives for Grab and uses each ride as a networking opportunity. Tell us a bit more about that one.
Yeah, I stumbled upon his story on TikTok. He has started sticking placards to the back of his driver's seat while driving for Grab that literally says, "I got retrenched," and has a QR code that links to his CV and also more of his story. And he tells me that it got quite a few people that clicked through and even offered some personal advice. I thought it was a really interesting story, and like it's a good strategy to kind of stay positive in a really difficult time in your life.
Yeah, it's a creative way to stand out amongst the crowd. Curious to know whether he received any feedback or responses to that resume being put out in the back of his seat.
So far, hasn't concluded his job hunt yet from the last time I spoke to him. But I think the positive impact of it is to kind of create more of a positive routine in a time when the routine has been sucked out of your life. And to kind of create kind of benchmarks where you're like, okay, I need to network with so-and-so people today, or I need to send out my CV to enough people today. Yeah.
I guess you could argue that networking is even more important these days, given the advent of AI and how much it's disrupted our daily lives. And you dive into how it's reshaping both sides of the hiring process, from job seekers using tools like ChatGPT to craft applications or to send emails, to companies using filters to screen them. What kind of impact do you think that is having on job seekers' chances and also on the fairness of the process overall?
So the data is pretty clear that these days the number of vacancies has actually decreased, but the number of people applying or the number of applications that are being sent out per vacancy has increased by quite a lot. Part of this comes down to AI because everyone can use ChatGPT now to craft a ton of cover letters, where in the past it might have taken a lot more effort. And based on data from LinkedIn, HR professionals are saying that a lot of applications come in without necessarily even fulfilling our requirements or being the kind of profile that we want. So it does mean that people are getting a lot more scattershot in their applications with AI, which is not necessarily a good thing. Yeah. But on the other side of things, I think it's not necessarily very sophisticated AI that companies are using. Filters have always existed. But when you are met with this huge flood of applications, it just means that a larger proportion of them are never getting read by a human, which is the tough part. Yeah.
Is there something to be said about how job seekers are perceiving AI, for example, as a threat versus an opportunity for them to upskill?
I think it's a complicated relationship because definitely we're already seeing in the tech sector that AI is leading to some layoffs. But at the same time, I think a lot of the interviewees I spoke to are really positive about the ability of AI to, how do I say this? Like, for someone who is not the most eloquent, for someone who is not necessarily the best at expressing why they're the best fit for a job, AI can be a really useful assistance there. Yeah.
Okay, let's touch on a couple of other folks you spoke to, Melvin Loy and Lishan Lim. They use their time off to reassess their priorities or explore new paths. Did you come away with a sense that people's definitions of success and work are changing?
Definitely, yeah. I think something that is changing is that we're no longer associating success with having like a permanent full-time job. Increasingly, people are finding a lot of satisfaction from flexible work, from the gig economy, from trying to find a work arrangement that works for them. For Mr. Loy, for example, he took time off work, or he left his previous job because he needed more space and flexibility to care for his aging parents. And that landed him in like this long period of time when he couldn't find a job. But once he did, I think it ended up being more fulfilling.
Are there any stories that surprised you or challenged assumptions that you had going in about what unemployment looks like in Singapore today?
One particularly fascinating person I spoke to was a guy named Kishore. He actually voluntarily left his old job because of burnout without securing the next job first. And he was really stressed because it took him a lot of effort to secure that job, and it was prestigious to him. And when he left the job, he decided to go into part-time employment and really narrow down what he was looking for in life and become more discerning. So in contrast to a lot of people I interviewed, he applied to a lot less jobs and spent a lot less time, I guess, freaking out and trying to play like a numbers game where like some might try to apply to 10, 20 jobs a day. He really narrowed it down. And I think that's kind of like a really positive approach to it.
So in the case like Kishore's, how important do you think support systems are in helping you redefine your purpose, be it friends, family, institutions?
I think it has a huge role to play. When you're unemployed, I think part of the difficulty is that your peers can not really understand the fact that you can't afford to eat out, you can't afford to go on this extra outing, and your life looks very different. You really need to cut back on expenses, and you don't have a routine anymore. So your daytime hours are kind of in a lot of flux. This is a time when reaching out to others who have been in similar positions or being very open about your needs with your friends and family, that can be really helpful. HR professionals told me that there is some stigma towards posting that you've been laid off, but oftentimes it's really helpful to really flag it to your network that, hey, I've lost my job, I'm looking. And this is something that helps recruiters find you. This is something that helps your network to give you opportunities. Yeah,
to that point, posting about being laid off, people can be reluctant to do so because of fear. And one of the 5 hacks that you have cited in the article is don't let fear cloud your judgment. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes, I think the rush or the desperation to get into a job can often mean that you end up going for jobs in which you are overqualified for, or jobs that are just not a good fit for what you're looking for in life, whether that's because of the work culture. What the people I've spoken to tell me is that the danger of doing that is that you can end up in the same initial first stage that you were at when you inevitably leave this job. And towards that, it is important to still keep your focus, to have a good list of things that you are looking for from an employer, and not to abandon those if your job hunt extends for longer than 3 months.
Yeah, speaking of that employee-employer relationship, is there anything that employers or policymakers, for that matter, often overlook about the lived experience of being laid off or stuck in a long job search? And what more can they do to step up?
I think something that can be hard to understand can be maybe the demoralizing aspect of it. It is like a pretty big blow to your self-esteem to be laid off or to be unemployed for a prolonged period of time for reasons out of your control. I feel like there's a lot of important and necessary upskilling rhetoric to fill your time well, but I think just as much there also needs to be more, moral or psychological support or awareness of the ways in which wellness can be hurt when you're unemployed for a prolonged period of time. Yeah.
What do you think about the idea of mental health days, for example, at an organization?
No, I think it's a great idea. It's a great curb against burnout, and it's something that I think more companies should implement.
So for listeners who may be going through this themselves, a layoff that is, or know someone who is, what's one takeaway or message that really stuck with you from the people you interviewed?
The main thing that everyone wished they knew before they were laid off is kind of knowing how long it would take. I think a lot of times people expect their period of unemployment to maybe be 3 to 6 months, but it could easily last longer than that. And it can therefore impact your budget, it can impact your self-esteem, it can impact even your desperation to take just the first job that comes your way. The most important thing that everyone relayed to me was that if they had known it would last this long, they would have set up a bigger financial buffer. They would have put up more money into their rainy day fund. I think that's the biggest takeaway I have, which is to save up a bit more.
Yeah, well, this is a difficult subject to navigate, so thanks so much for sharing your insights and for writing that article. In case you want to read it, it's in the Straits Times. It's titled, What People Wish They Knew Before They Got Laid Off. Kai, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. That was Teo Kai Xiang from the Straits Times Life Desk. Stay with Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.